The building you are looking at here is the Supreme Court of the United States in Washington, D.C. And we are looking at this because we're going to be talking about a constitutional principle known as judicial review. So what is judicial review? Who has this power of judicial review? You can kind of break it down using clues. Judicial review is a power that's held by the judicial branch of government. And you can check out our separation of powers video to learn a little bit more about the power of the judicial branch if you want. Judicial almost sounds like judge, right? And so we know that we're dealing with the court system here, the judges. The courts have this power of judicial review. Now this one's a little bit interesting because it is a principle of the Constitution, but it's not really technically in the main text of the Constitution. It was kind of created a little bit after the Constitution. The court has interpreted the Constitution to say that they have this power. Think of the judges then, like federal judges and Supreme Court justices, as the referees for the Constitution. So this power all really comes out of an early Supreme Court case, Marbury v. Madison, which you may have already heard of in some other social studies courses. And the man pictured here is the Chief Justice at the time, John Marshall, who wrote the opinion for this case. This is arguably the most important Supreme Court decision in our nation's history. There have been a lot of important decisions, but they all stem from the power that the court gained through this Marbury v. Madison case. I'm not going to go into the historical details of the case, but I want to look at how the court gave a ruling. That's the key part of Marbury v. Madison. The court ended up ruling that while Madison was in the wrong in the actions that were done, the case itself should never have been brought to the court because they ruled that the law that Marbury was using to bring this case to the court, the law itself was unconstitutional. They ruled a part of that law to be unconstitutional. So it doesn't really even matter what Marbury and Madison were fighting about. The key part of this ruling was the court, for the first time, put in a ruling that they were declaring part of a law to be unconstitutional. And that's kind of where this power of judicial review was born. Up until that time, it wasn't really sure if they had that power or how the power should be used. So, quote from that ruling, "It is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is." This is a big quote. This is Justice Marshall saying the court is going to have the final say on what the Constitution means and if laws apply and abide by those rules in the Constitution. So this is a big deal. This was the court kind of stating that the court was going to have this power moving forward. You might be thinking, so what? Some old dude wrote a thing 200 years ago, 200 plus years ago. Why do I care about Marbury v. Madison? Well, judicial review may apply to these like specific cases that we're going to learn about in the class, but those rulings go on to then impact millions of people's lives in the United States, because when the Supreme Court or a federal court decides something, that ends up applying to millions of people. It's a big power. Judicial review over time has had different impacts on society. So at times, there have been rulings that have restricted people's rights. There have been some bad court decisions that were enacted through the power of judicial review, like the Dred Scott decision of 1857, where the court decided that black people were property and could not be eligible for rights that citizens had, even if they were a freed black. Basically, the Dred Scott decision was saying that, and kind of helped usher the country further towards civil war. If you notice, the date of 1857, we're a few years before the U.S. Civil War. Or after the Civil War, the Supreme Court still was on the wrong side of history in a lot of ways by allowing and saying that racial segregation was constitutional in the Plessy v. Ferguson case. Now the court sometimes expands rights, though. So there have been different times where, in the specific example of Plessy v. Ferguson, the court basically reversed itself almost 60 years later. In the Brown v. Board of Education case, which you've probably heard of. It's one of the bigger ones that we study in social studies. which declared basically that Plessy v. Ferguson was wrong and that racial segregation is not allowed. Trying to find a more recent case of judicial review, especially expanding rights, and that would be the Obergefell v. Hodges case in 2015. And this basically struck down state laws that denied same-sex couples the right to marry. So that was an expansion of rights. So even though it was specifically about the people in that case, when the Supreme Court makes a ruling like this, that affects laws all around the country. So judicial review is very, very powerful, and you're going to learn lots about judicial review as we look at different examples throughout this year. So hopefully this has helped, and if you do have any questions, make sure you reach out to your government teacher, and we will help you out.